Hello, I'm Daniela Elana, and in episode 47 of Historical Paranormal, we'll discuss the legend of the liquor. This story is creepy on so many levels. While there's no particular origin or truthful tale behind it, the story still gets passed around the campfire and has been featured in popular fiction. It begins with a teenage girl who is gifted with a dog from her parents for amusement and to keep her company while they leave town around 8 p.m. Her dog would sleep with her each night. She would often put her hand down and feel the dog lick. One night, while her parents are away, she hears a dripping sound, and she assumes it was that the faucet is left running. She gets up to go to the restroom to turn off the faucet. When she returns to bed, she pets her dog beneath, and he licks her hand more eagerly. The dripping sound continues throughout the night, and it happens several times until the girl has enough. Around 6:52 a.m., she rises to check the bathroom's tap again. Still, there is nothing. She then realizes the sound was coming from her cupboard. She investigates it to find her dog hanging dead in the cupboard with a note tucked in his collar, written in blood, reading, "Humans can lick too." Other variations of the story include the dog being found in the shower, with the block being written on the wall, or feature a nearsighted old woman rather than a young girl. The fate of the dog also varies, the dog simply being hanged to it being skinned, disemboweled, or otherwise mutilated. The message is sometimes written on the floor or on the bathroom mirror rather than on the wall. Some versions include the parents returning and their discovery of the killer hiding elsewhere in the house, frequently the basement, the girl's closet, or under her bed. In other versions, the girl's parents arrive back in the morning and ask if their daughter had a good night. When she tells them that her dog had kept her calm by licking her hand, she is told that the dog in question has been locked either in the basement or outside. But it's either the girl ran out of the house and the killer was found, or the girl dies. So why exactly do people pass around the story, and where does it come from? There's a forerunner in 1919 called The Diary of Mr. Poynter by Mr. M.R. James, where a young man absently strokes his dog as he thinks while reading an old manuscript account of the sinister death of the young student obsessed with his own hair. Of course, the creature crouching at his side is not the dog. The tale is a version of the handwriting on the wall urban legend, such as "Welcome to the world of AIDS" and "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" The trope derives from a Bible story in the book of Daniel, in which a feast is thrown by the pagan Babylonian king Belshazzar. It is interrupted by a specter or a disembodied hand scrawling a cryptic message on the wall. As ultimately interpreted by the prophet Daniel, the message conveys God's judgment, predicting the downfall of Belshazzar and the entire kingdom. To read the handwriting on the wall is to foresee one's own impending doom, an apt and chilling metaphor. Variants of "Humans Can Lick Too" were collected by folklorists as long as the late 1960s. Indeed, the chain letter version appears to have been cribbed from a 1967 oral transcription published in Ronald L. Baker's Hoyser's Folk Legends, as in the later variant. The events were said to have taken place near a small town called Farmsburg, though there were two female protagonists instead of one, and the note left by the murdering madman read, "I'm coming to see you. I had my chance once before, but I didn't take it. Not only dogs can lick." Folklorists have been studying the spread forever. Dr. Andrea Kita, an associate professor and folklorist at East Carolina University, says there are two things that make a story a contemporary legend: believability and propagation. Unlike a fairy tale where bears can talk and trees dance, a contemporary legend has to be made of actions recognizable and native to the world around us. Generally, they are set in the recent historical past, and often they are localized, Kita says. It's not just any library that's sinking under the weight of the book, she says, referencing a common contemporary legend about a collegiate library wherein the architect failed to account for the book's mass when engineering the building foundation. It's your library down the street. Whether or not this is based on a true story, it is one creepy one that will make you think twice about if you feel the lick of your pet at night. People hear them all over the place, Kita said. That's what makes them so interesting to study. And they have resonance in so many places. Often a contemporary legend is disseminated with a friend of a friend disclaimer. That is, the storyteller gives it veracity by mentioning that it happened to a friend of a friend. This is particularly common in a city-specific story. The one about a girl with a dead dog in a suitcase, or the super rats, or Hurricane Sandy. Hearing that something happened to a person only a few steps removed is what makes a contemporary legend so easily believable. These stories happened in your own town, in my town, in every single town in America. They belonged everywhere and nowhere. We all get to claim them as our own. Contemporary legends are short, apocryphal tales which are told as true, involve a contemporary setting and a feature, a single event, usually an individual experience, as the core of the story, says Dr. Joseph M. Stubbersfield, a research fellow in the propagation of narratives and cognitive bias at Durham University in the United Kingdom. Although people often use the term more widely to refer to misinformation in general, Dr. Stubbersfield points to two key characteristics that determine whether a story spreads far and wide. The first is whether it carries social information, to which we are especially susceptible. Greater intelligence in primates likely evolved because being able to keep track of complex social relationships and groups gave individuals an advantage, he says. Knowing in the example of the lick hand that your dog could be a person, or more granularly that you should never take your safety for granted, could be an evolutionary advantage. The second key characteristic, he says, is an emotional resonance. Stories that are especially disgusting, scary, or hilarious are sticky and therefore easy to spread. With the lick hand, there are variations where the dog is dead, variants where you hear a dripping sound all night, variations where it's an ex-boyfriend. I've heard a different version where instead of a dog, it's a partner who is in the morning turns out to be someone entirely different. Kita says, when you hear a lot of variations of a story, you know a lot of people are telling it, and they're all changing it up like that because there's a product of oral storytelling. Legends are almost impossible to trace. We want to know where something comes from. We do look for the print versions, Kita says. These stories have the advantage of never being so complicated that they couldn't have actually happened, or that multiple people could have invented them separately. Kita adds, a story like The Licked Hand might have been told to a writer on the L Word as a child, who wrote it into the show, which was seen by millions of people, who passed it on, forgetting where it came from until someone eventually passes it down. Folklore and popular culture symbolically feed off each other, and together eschew the necessity of factual verification for a story to circulate. It's easy to become wrapped up in these stories as a preteen whispering around a campfire or 100 circle of sleeping bags, as Trevor Blank, a professor at SUNY Potsdam who studies modern folklore, told New York Magazine. Children and adolescents love legends because they get to experience the story. They hear the motifs, but often create their own iterations, which also helps them kind of flex their own creativity muscles and imagine a darker side of the world. The side of the world that you are running away from as a child, but are constantly being pulled into as you enter adulthood, facing these dark realities of the world and leaving innocence behind. The dark realities Blank refers to are compelling. Researchers who analyzed more than 220 contemporary legends found that the stories reference hazards of life far more often than the securities, which makes sense. It's safer to become engrossed in a risk that doesn't exist than to ignore a real one. On top of that, if a story scares you, research has found that you're more likely to pass it on. This has been true for probably all of modern human history. We have evidence of people mailing each other urban legends in letters, faxing them in the 80s, and sending them in email chains in the 90s and early 2000s. The spread of stories is certainly more widespread and not always by word of mouth anymore, Kita says. With the rise of the internet and social media, a story that is much more legend than fact can disseminate quickly and widely. A big potential effect is the fact that digital communication means that you can pass on a story without having to remember it. You can just retweet or copy and paste content, Stubbersfield says. This could have a big impact on the nature of urban legends compared to being spread by word of mouth, with selection of what is read becoming more important than the pressures of having to recall something and potentially changing it when you retell it. Internet exposes us to more contemporary legends than any other era in human history. It also, in theory, gives us the ability to fact check them instantly, though no one really does. I don't think our access to information will change people's beliefs in them, says Stubbersfield. I think for the most part, people don't really question these stories that much. Dishearteningly, there is evidence to back this up. A 2014 psychological study found that knowledge does not hold enough weight to fully counter repetition. If we hear a story that seems true, we'll believe it whether or not it has been disproven. The lack of verification in no way diminishes the appeal that the urban legends have for us. Jan Harold Brunvart wrote in the 1981 book The Vanishing Hitchhiker, American Urban Legends and Their Meanings, we enjoy them merely as stories and tend to at least half believe them as possibly accurate reports. Some of these stories may actually be based on true events, but there's no way of knowing. It's possible that even if a story isn't technically true, it's true in the sense of ostension, says Kita, in that someone who hears a story might then act out the story. This happens with contemporary legends like placing razors in children's Halloween candy after hearing about it elsewhere. All legends then are believable, but not ever truly verifiable. That certainly, though, doesn't keep anyone from telling or believing them. Even though the licked hand is a legend with little basis in reality, I know this academically and truthfully. During the time I reported this story, I jerked awake every single night. I felt my dog in bed with me at night, relieved that my faucet wasn't silent. So whether or not this is based as a cautionary tale or someone just had a little fun, it will continue to be passed down with variations. And this is simply the core of many urban legends and folklore in history. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. There are exactly 3 left in the season. Stay tuned, and until next time.